A baby boy by the name of Adolf Hitler was born April 20th, 1889. The pregnancy and birth were normal, but little did Adolf's parents know that their son would grow up to become Germany's most powerful dictator, as well as pull off the biggest mass murder of all history, the Holocaust. How and why a single person can get enough power to ruthlessly murder 11 million people is beyond explanation. The Holocaust is a big part of world history, and to understand it, we need to start from the beginning. Adolf Hitler had a normal childhood growing up, but when his younger brother died and he was rejected from the Academy of Fine Arts twice, his life took a turn as he decided to join the German army in 1914. As the Great Depression in Germany rose, so did Hitler's rise in politics. He quickly rose to dictator and began the Nazi Party. According to Adolf Hitler's bibliography, between 1939 and 1945, the Nazis and their collaborators were responsible for 11 million to 14 million people. Deaths took place in concentration camps and through mass executions. Other persecuted groups besides the Jews included the Poles, communists, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses. Hitler probably never visited the concentration camps and did not speak publicly about the killings. This is a picture of him. One of the most famous Jews who sadly did not survive the concentration camps was a young girl by the name of Anne Frank. She kept a journal of her short life, which gives us great detail about her and her family hiding from the Nazis for 2 years before they were captured and sent to concentration camps. A quote from her journal says, "I feel wicked sleeping in a warm bed, while my dearest friends have been knocked down or fallen in the gutter somewhere out in the cold night. I get frightened when I think of close friends who have now been delivered into the hands of the cruelest brutes that walk the earth, all because they were Jewish." The Jews were not necessarily captured, but the Jews had to be registered, and failing to do so would have to forfeit any of the property they had. Of those who did not register tried to hide. Most of the time, out of fear, it was the neighbors who told the Nazis where they were hiding and would soon be captured and sent to the concentration camps. The Nazis would take these Jewish families out of their homes and stuff them into cattle cars and trains to transfer them to these concentration camps. According to the Holocaust Encyclopedia, the term concentration camp refers to a camp in which people are detained and confined under harsh conditions and without regard to legal norms of arrest and imprisonment that are acceptable for the constitutional democracy. The first concentration camp in Germany were established soon after Hitler's appointment as Chancellor in January 1933. One of the biggest concentration camps was Auschwitz, where 1.1 million people were murdered there. By the time of its liberation, Auschwitz had 3 large camps and 45 sub-camps. Auschwitz I, or the main camp, was the original camp. At the entrance of Auschwitz I stood the famous sign, Arbeit macht frei, which means work makes one free. Here's a picture. Auschwitz I also housed the Nazi staff that ran an entire camp complex. Auschwitz II, also known as Birkenau, was completed in 1942. It was built approximately 1.9 miles away from Auschwitz I, and that was where the real killing center was. It was Birkenau where the dreaded selections were carried out on the ramp, and there were sophisticated and camouflaged gas chambers laid in waiting. Once the trains would stop at Auschwitz, the newly arrived were told to leave all their belongings on board and were forced to disembark from the train and gather upon the railway platforms. Families who disembarked together were quickly and brutally split up and ordered into 2 individual lines. Most women, children, and older men, those that looked unfit or healthy, were sent to the left. Most of the young men, and the ones that looked like they were strong enough to do hard labor, were sent to the right. As the 2 people in the lines did not know what was happening, the reality was that the left meant immediate death by gas chambers, and the right meant that they would become a prisoner of the camp. But most of the prisoners would later die of starvation, exposure, forced labor, and torture. All of Auschwitz prisoners were stripped of their belongings such as clothing, eyeglasses, medicine, books, pictures, or jewelry, where they would be shipped back to Germany and sold again. The people who were sent to the left was the majority of those who arrived at Auschwitz. They were never told that they had been chosen for death. The entire mass murder system depended on keeping this a secret from its victims. The victims had found out where they were headed, they would most definitely fight back. But they didn't know, so the victims latched onto the hope that the Nazis wanted them to believe, having been told that they were going to be sent to work and needed to be disinfected and have showers. The victims were ushered into the hallway where they were told to remove their clothing. Completely naked, these men and women and children were ushered into a large room that looked like a big shower, and they even had fake shower heads on the wall. When the doors were shut, the Nazis would pour in the poison into an opening in the roof or through a window, which would turn into a gas once it contracted air. The gas killed quickly, but it was not instantaneous. Victims, finally realizing that this was not a shower room, climbed over one another, trying to find a pocket of breathable air. Others clawed at the door until their fingers bled. Once everyone at the room was dead, a special prisoner was assigned to take this room and clean it out and remove the bodies. The bodies were searched for gold and then placed in a cremator. Each of these gas chambers murdered about 6,000 people a day. Those that had been sent to the right during the selection process of the ramp went through a dehumanization process that turned into camp prisoners. All of their clothes were and all their remainings were taken from them, and their hair was completely cut off. They were given striped prison outfits and pairs of shoes, which were normally the wrong size. They were registered and had their arms tattooed with a number, and transferred to one of the Auschwitz main forced labors. In the barracks, prisoners slept cramped together in 3 persons per wooden bunk. Toilets in the barracks consisted of a bucket and usually overflowed by the morning. In the morning, all prisoners would be assembled outside for roll call. Standing outside for hours in the weather, either intense heat or below freezing, was itself a torture. After roll call, the prisoners would be forced to march outside where they would work for the day. While some prisoners worked in factories, others worked during hard labor. After hours of hard work, the prisoners would be marched back to the camp for another roll call. Food was scarce and consisted of a bowl of soup or some bread, and the limited amount of food as extremely hard labor was intentionally meant to work and starve the prisoners to death. When the Nazis realized that the Russians were successfully pushing their way towards Germany in 1944, they decided to start destroying the evidence of the massacres at Auschwitz. Hitler ordered the destruction of the cremator, and the human ashes were buried in large huge pits covered with grass. Many of the warehouses were emptied, and their contents were shipped back to Germany. According to the Jewish Virtual Library, April 5, 1945, units from the American forces were the first Americans to discover the prisoners and corpses. The Americans found the camps by accident. They did not set out to liberate the camps, but they found starved, frail bodies of hundreds of prisoners who had managed to survive, as well as the corpses. Eisenhower ordered the American units back to visit the camps, and he called a press back home. Then the Americans soon liberated the camps and set the living prisoners free, finally putting an end to what we now refer as the Holocaust. Through understanding the events that took place during the Holocaust, we can now make sure this will not happen again. Now, every time you hear about the Holocaust, hopefully this speech gave you a little bit more insight.